and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. Today we're going to do part 2 of Little Blue Book number 112, titled The Secret of Self-Development, written by John Cowper Powles, copyright 1926. Okay. And we left off on, page 17, and here we go. Think that although he will love to skim over the gnomic pages of the great metaphysicians, he will treat each peculiar thinker rather as an artist than as a discoverer of pure truth. I think he will visualize his hard facts for a month or so, shall we say, according to the vision of Hegel, and then for another month transform them according to the vision of Spinoza or of Schopenhauer. And I know I read that at the end of the last one. One of his very greatest dangers when a youth sets out to become cultivated is the danger of allowing his reason to run riot at the expense of all other human faculties. Logic is an invaluable method of capturing the secret of life, but it is not the only one. Undiluted by instinct, reason can become a ferocious wild beast whose savage delight it is to rend and tear at its own vitals. What a deeper culture seems to suggest is that there is a certain equilibrium, a certain balance of his faculties possible to man. Call it perhaps his imaginative reason, by which he can follow the evasive fluidity of nature, of that nature who herself cherishes certain basic illusions, and by throwing the force of his mind outward toward the flow of the world, save himself from this rational beast, bred in his vitals and breeding upon his heart's blood. Soon enough, when our youth has acquired the trick of this mellower, gentler, more gracious philosophy, will that terrible job of his, that scolding wife, or to put it the other way round, her selfish husband, her cantankerous children, grow mellow, transparent, insubstantial, like things seen far off, seen through some lovely flowing vapor, as such an individual surveys them through the quivering luminosity of the thoughts of Plato, or the subtle humor of the genius of Charles Lamb. In particular cases, a person will find that it is from the art of painting or the art of music rather than from literature that he will draw his power to deal with life. But I cannot help feeling that there are certain advantages possessed by literature which renders that art more potent than the others in the general stream of things. A man might be made more whimsically indulgent to his employer's banalities if the contours of the fellow's complacent visage sent him thinking of Rembrandt or Picasso. A woman might endure her husband's exhausting trivialities with better grace if all the while he was chattering she allowed her memory to dally with some great musical phrase of Beethoven or Strakowski. But it would be some sardonic half-line out of Hamlet, some mellow life-searching quip out of the essays of Ella, that would work in these cases the real miracle and reduce the actual thing itself. The sanctimonious employer, the fatuous husband, into something that could be contemplated in its very essence, with the large and overflowing contemplation of poetry and irony. It is because literature uses words as its medium rather than any other material that culture, facing like Moses the adamantite rock of the visible world, finds in this great art the magic rod that can draw forth the living water. For, as Mr. Eliot of St. Louis suggests to us in his queer poem called Wasteland, there are certain terrible contrasts in life that words alone, with their power of evoking the beauty of the centuries side by side with the vulgarity of the hour, are able to bring forth and eternalize. One almost infallible test as to whether any young person possesses real aesthetic taste or not is to note how far he displays a tendency to intellectual braggadocio. Any tendency to become a smart aleck damns a person completely, as far as the half mark of true culture is concerned. For the strange thing is that any contact with the great imaginative writers evokes a mysterious mingling of pride and humility, which makes it as impossible for a lover of these books to assume impertinent airs as for a really saintly person to be sanctimonious. To read great books does not mean that one becomes bookish. It means that something of the terrible insight of Dostoevsky, of the richly charged imagination of Shakespeare, of the luminous wisdom of Goethe, actually passes into the personality of the reader, so that in contact with the chaos of ordinary life, certain free and flowing outlines emerge, like the forms of some classic picture, endowing both people and things with a grandeur beyond what is visible to the superficial glance. Nor is this distinction merely superimposed upon these objects from without. It is reached by penetrating below their disordered surfaces into those aspects of their essential being. Where within this high quality reality and truly exists. That doesn't make sense as a sentence. Genuine self-culture defends itself from the intrusion of the vulgar by all manner of crafty devices, but in the presence of the simple and the natural, it instinctively conceals its subtlety and grows naive, direct, artless, childlike. For culture has this in common with the famous Pauline definition of charity, that it effaces itself with the fluidity of water or vapor, when its betrayal would imply the least shadow of conscious superiority. Culture does not exhaust itself in attempts to become learned. It quickly grows aware that there are qualities in style in the foreign languages utterly beyond the reach of the cleverest translator. Thus it prefers the baldest prose version of Homer or Horace or Dante to the most eloquent poetic paraphrase. And where it can, it meditates over the words of the original, as one might smell a flower, with the hope of getting at least something of the untranslatable magic of those ocular syllables. To think that one can escape from the limitations of one's temperamental fatality and acquire a catholic and comprehensive appreciation of all the great authors is an ill-advised conceit. The beginning of culture, and perhaps the end of it as well, is the discovery and subsequent banking up of one's inherent taste. But into the formation of this taste, many diverse traditions, many contradictory streams may well flow. And the cultivated man becomes by his birthright a child of all the ages. He is able to hold the clamorous present at a seemingly distance, selecting from it, discriminating drastically. Okay, let me read that sentence again. To hold the clamorous present at a seemingly distance, selecting from it, discriminating drastically amid its profusion, the frequently rejecting it altogether. What culture aims at is not just an escape from life or an unintelligent plunge into agreeable sensations. It aims at a certain thrilling happiness, at once sensuous and intellectual, which alone can be reached by a contemplation of this mysterious absolute revealed in nature, which we call the magic of life or the beauty of life. Pardon me. That this evasive beauty extends its margins far beyond the realms of the charming and the picturesque is realized as soon as the first steps of culture are taken. Those wild, whirling words of Hamlet, those mad cries of Lear, those maledictions of Prometheus seem to touch some vibrant chord in the human heart which corresponds to something in nature, which is anything but soothing and serene. And yet out of these things there emerges a demonic grandeur not to be refuted, just as out of many a tragic death there exhales an indescribable peace, stern and beautiful, which passes all the platitudes of consolation. Culture, I repeat, is nothing till some measure of the mind of the great spirits of our race has passed into the soul of the reader, into his bones and blood and nerves. Then, and only then, and till then, will he have the secret strength to endure the scorn of the mob, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of the despised love, the iron and adamant of fate, and the raw, crude litter of wind-blown chance. Each single day that dawns becomes to the cultivated man or woman the unrolling of a mighty wave of mystery, heavy with indescribable wonders, shadows upon leaves, whispers upon the air, movements of clouds, the coming and going of human footsteps, all the 1,001 little things that compose the ritual of our common hours, fall into significant focus when the senses that receive them have been attuned by the receptivity of Wordsworth, the concentration of Goethe, the glamorous lethargies of Keats. What matter though the man thus armored, thus weaponed, to assassinate the commonplace is compelled to drink evilly brewed coffee and rush off to a vile-smelling place of work? What matter if he is fooled as an unbelievable nut by his tough companions? He has on his side an innumerable company of invisible spirits, and it is hard to believe that these immortal ones have left behind no psychic power wherewith to support him in his tribulations. What matter though the woman or young girl thus immersed in the imagination of Blake and Dostoevsky, of Conrad and Proust, feels herself isolated, stranded, overpowered, and helpless, in the presence of gross sounds, hideous voices, places devoid of all graciousness? She has on her side an absolute power, older than all the centuries. She has eaten and drunk of the body and blood of the great gods themselves. She has sought iron, the hard facts of life, not ease or success, but a glimpse of the loveliness, of the unutterable. And before that hard day is over, she will have had her reward. The purpose of this essay will have been fulfilled if my readers have come to agree with me that what we call the art of self-culture is not a luxury nor a learned plaything, far less an asset in the road of worldly success. It will have attained its purpose if I have been able to convince them that such self-culture can actually take the place of love, of religion, of ambition, of excitement and adventure. And it can do this because the material of its working is the simple, obvious, sensuous awareness of just being alive upon the earth, of this awareness as it is heightened and made subtle by the spirits of poetry, irony, and imagination. But though to the best of my ability I have indicated what I feel to be the ideal of self-culture, these violent definitions of mine are only so many fierce blowing winds driving away some of the mists through which we are compelled to wander. One can render his interpretations amiable, tentative, cautious, sympathetic, so as to make allowance for the infinite variety of our faltering human approaches to this high plateau. Or one can hurry forth a great thundering manifesto or bulletin from the front, such as shall hit the needs of a few desperate combatants against mediocrity, while it tends to leave the majority of the armies of light discouraged and disheartened. Turn the page. The danger of adopting the first method, that of sympathetic casuistry and gentle discrimination, is that it leaves the main issue blurred and the war aims of our assault on the citadel confused and vague. The danger of the second method, which, all the same, I have chosen in these pages, that of holding the standard clear and high, is that it suggests a sort of all or nothing campaign in which everything is black and white, and the infinite graduations of the real human situation are arrogantly set aside. This seems to me, however, the only satisfactory course to take, for without a clear issue and an exalted idea, and the whole question is apt to slip into vague, half humorous meandering, while with a clear and even austere issue before us, the great natural instincts of compromise, which all men possess, will soon be found to soften these stern outlines and mold these rigid forms into compliance with that inevitable human weakness which, after all, may sometimes be wiser than any doctrine. In these modern days, we are flooded by books, and the degrees of our human culture are as infinitely various as are the types of human temperament. All we can do is to make clear to ourselves what is the main direction to the high, difficult peaks, and then wander forward as best we can. How often, as we read some modern criticism of a great classic, there comes, as Thoreau says, like a green bow across a dusty path, one single quotation of such inconceivable beauty that it is possible to meditate upon it for days. These modern critics who deal with the great masters are like vintagers' carts descending into the level valley. And the drift of my whole argument is this, that a single bunch of grapes brought down from the vines of those mountains is better than goblets of foaming wine drained from the wine barrels of the valley. And let's see. Next chapter. The Revolt from Knowledge, written by Isaac Goldberg. And I'll tell you what, I think we'll stop here for part 2. We're about almost 18 minutes into it. And in part 3, we'll come to The Revolt from Knowledge by Isaac Goldberg. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in part 3.